My husband mocked my unemployable status for years, never realizing I was the reclusive CEO of the firm he called home. When he laughed during my fake job interview, I didn't cry. I walked into the boardroom and fired him. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The heavy crystal glass felt cold against my palm as I watched my husband, James, laugh with his friends across our marble living room. I stayed silent through another round of their cruel jokes, my face a practiced mask of quiet humiliation while they toasted to their own brilliance. James clinked his glass against Michael's, his voice dripping with a smugness that made my skin crawl. He mocked me in front of his friends for not having a job, and they all joined in, never suspecting for a second that I actually owned the company they all worked for. I watched them, 5 men in tailored suits, all senior executives at Reynolds Technologies, and realized the irony was delicious. I had hired the firm that hunted each of them, and tomorrow that same firm would help me clean house. Remember when she tried interviewing at Reynolds? James said, loosening his designer tie as he looked at the others. God, I wish I could have seen that train wreck. I took another sip of water, keeping my eyes down. If only he knew that the interview he was laughing about had been my quarterly inspection of middle management. I had built Reynolds Technologies from the ground up 12 years ago, long before I even met James. The company was my first love and my redemption after watching my father's small business crumble under corporate raiders. I had orchestrated every layer of the holding companies that kept my identity a secret, even from the man I shared a bed with. At least she is persistent. Michael from marketing chuckled. How many rejections has it been this month, James? I lost count. James smirked, reaching for the 30-year-old scotch I had bought with my own money. Everything in this house, the art on the walls, the imported furniture, and even the fancy watch on his wrist, was paid for by the company he thought had rejected me. I had learned the hard way that success attracts parasites, so when I met James at a charity gala, I decided to experiment. I presented myself as a struggling freelance consultant, driving a modest car. James had seemed different at first, telling me I would find my place. But as soon as we married and he moved into what he thought was our house, the mask began to slip. Success changed him, or rather, it revealed who he really was. Hey, honey, James called out now, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Maybe you should try the coffee shop down the street. I heard they are hiring baristas. The room erupted in more laughter, and I forced a weak smile, playing my role perfectly. Inside, I was reviewing the documentation my private investigators had compiled over the past year. I knew about the unofficial meetings with competitors, the inflated expense reports, and the steady leaks of company information that always seemed to benefit James's personal stock portfolio. He wasn't just a bully. He was a thief. I think I will head upstairs, I said softly, standing up and smoothing my simple dress. Big day tomorrow. Another interview. Don't wait up, sweetie, James called after me. We are celebrating Peterson's promotion. It might be a late one. I turned away so they wouldn't see the flash in my eyes. Peterson was my latest plant in senior management, and tonight he would be documenting their alcohol-loose conversations, adding more evidence to the files locked away in my private study. I reached the top of the stairs and heard the sound of breaking glass, followed by raucous laughter, a careless disrespect for my home that would have angered me once. Now, it just added another piece to the documentation of inappropriate use of company property. I settled behind my desk, and the hidden wall panel slid open, revealing 3 monitors that sprang to life. They displayed the real-time operations of my empire, a global reach built on strategy and ironclad NDAs. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, my most trusted executive. Final documentation in place. Board members briefed. Tomorrow's meeting confirmed. I smiled, thinking of the revelation to come. The board had always known me as Alexandra Chin, the reclusive founder who spoke through encrypted calls. Tomorrow, they would meet their CEO in person for the first time, not as a mysterious figure, but as the woman James called his unemployable wife. My fingers traced the edge of the termination papers on my desk. They weren't just for James, but for every member of his little drinking club downstairs. Each document was backed by months of evidence, reviewed by a legal team that didn't make mistakes. I watched the security feed as James and his friends stumbled out to their waiting cars, unaware that their drivers were my employees, discreetly documenting their intoxicated state with dashboard cameras. I changed into my modest pajamas, one last night of pretense before the storm. Tomorrow, I would wake up as an underestimated wife, but by sunset, I would be the architect of their downfall. The morning arrived with the precision of a well-orchestrated plan. I woke before James, watching him struggle with a hangover as he rushed to prepare for a normal day at the office. I had already been at Reynolds Technologies since 6:30 a.m., entering through the service entrance in an unremarkable navy suit. Sarah met me in the basement security office, handing me a visitor's badge that felt strange against my blazer. Angela Martinez, the badge read. I was the eager candidate, desperate to impress. A performance I needed to witness firsthand to see how deep the rot had spread in my own halls. I sat in the lobby at 8:45 a.m., hiding behind a copy of the company's annual report as James strode past me. He didn't even glance at the woman sitting in the corner. Miss Martinez, an HR representative named Thomas, said, appearing on schedule, "Please follow me." The elevator ride was filled with small talk I had engineered through corporate culture initiatives, all while employees nodded at the woman they thought was just another hopeful candidate. Thomas led me through the open office layout I designed years ago, his tone carrying that subtle condescension reserved for people he had already decided not to hire. The skills assessment was almost insulting in its simplicity, consisting of basic coding problems I could have solved in my sleep. I deliberately made small mistakes, playing the role of the nervous applicant. Through the glass walls, I could see James and his cohorts in their morning meeting, laughing about something. Thomas reviewed my intentionally flawed work and sighed. "This is interesting," he said, his pause speaking volumes. "Let's move on to the panel interview." He led me into a conference room that overlooked the city, a view I usually enjoyed from my private office 20 floors above. 3 middle managers waited inside, all wearing expressions of bored superiority. "So, Miss Martinez," the first interviewer began without introducing himself. "I see you have been between positions for some time." "Yes," I replied, adding a slight tremor to my voice. "It has been challenging in this market. And what makes you think you are qualified for a position at Reynolds Technologies?" the second interviewer asked, never looking up from his phone. I launched into the story we had prepared, a mix of genuine qualifications masked by apparent desperation. With each response, I watched them grow more dismissive, already deciding my fate just as they had done to countless others. Through the glass, I saw James passing by. He did a double take, then smirked and pulled out his phone. Moments later, the interviewers' phones buzzed simultaneously. I didn't need to see the screens to know he was messaging them about his wife's latest embarrassing attempt at employment. The rest of the interview was a masterclass in corporate cruelty, filled with subtle jabs and barely concealed yawns. I documented every microaggression and every breach of HR policy while maintaining my facade of nervous optimism. "Thank you for your time," Thomas said finally. "We will be in touch." As I walked toward the elevator, I heard James's voice around the corner. "No way that was your wife, man. She really is desperate. Did you see her suit?" probably from Target. I kept walking, letting their laughter fuel the fire. In my purse, my real phone buzzed with messages. Board members arriving early. Legal team standing by. Security ready to escort. I ducked into a restroom where Sarah had hidden a garment bag earlier that morning. Inside was my real armor, a meticulously tailored suit, and the CEO security badge I had never worn in public. I checked my reflection, adjusting the pearl necklace that had been my mother's. Success is silent, she used to say, until the perfect moment to roar. I stepped out of the restroom as Alexandra Chin for the first time in my own building. The employees' eyes widened as they struggled to reconcile the confident executive before them with the nervous interviewee from moments ago. The click of my heels against the marble floor announced each step toward the executive floor, and the whispers started immediately. Word of the mysterious CEO's presence was spreading like wildfire. I took the private elevator, the one James had always wondered about. As I ascended, Sarah's text confirmed that the board members were seated, and James's team was still in their morning briefing. The elevator opened directly into the boardroom's antechamber. Through the frosted glass, I could see the silhouettes of the board members, all aware of what was about to unfold. But first, I had a different meeting to attend. I turned left, heading toward the executive conference room where James and his inner circle were celebrating. I stood in the shadows of the hallway and heard James's voice through the door. "You should have seen her face during the interview," James was saying, his voice smug. "My own wife, thinking she could actually land a position here. I mean, what's next? Trying to become CEO?" The room erupted in laughter. It was time. I stepped into the doorway, my presence casting a long shadow across their morning coffees. The laughter died instantly. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying the authority of 12 years of leadership, "I think I will deliver that news myself." James's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth, his face draining of color as he stared at me. "What are you doing here?" James stammered, his eyes bulging as he took in my suit. "And why are you dressed like that?" "Like the CEO of Reynolds Technologies," I finished for him, stepping fully into the room. "Exactly like that, as a matter of fact." Michael started to laugh, a nervous, high-pitched sound that died abruptly when no one else joined in. Peterson, my plant in the room, was already calmly gathering his things with a knowing smirk. James tried to stand, reaching for some semblance of control. "This is a restricted floor, Alex. Security will be here any minute to throw you out." "They are already here," I replied calmly. 2 security officers appeared behind me, their faces stone cold, though they aren't here for the reason you think. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text. Immediately, every screen in the conference room lit up with a single document, the company's original incorporation papers, bearing my signature and my photo. "Alexandra Chin," I announced, watching their faces contort as the realization hit them like a physical blow. "Founder and CEO of Reynolds Technologies. Or as you know me, James's unemployable wife." The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. James's face had progressed from white to a sickly shade of green. His eyes darted between my face and the documents on the screens, unable to process that his wife of 8 years was the owner of everything he had ever bragged about building. "This is impossible," he whispered. "You're just what, James?" I moved to the head of the table, my table, and sat down. "Just your wife? Just someone who couldn't even land an entry-level position? Tell me, how does it feel to realize you've been mocking your own boss for years?" Michael stood up suddenly, his chair screeching against the floor. "I should go," he muttered, his voice shaking. "Sit down," I commanded. My voice cut through his panic, and he collapsed back into his seat. None of you are going anywhere just yet. I pressed another button on my phone, and the screens changed. Now they displayed a compilation of security footage, email exchanges, and recorded conversations. Every joke, every instance of mockery, and every moment of cruelty played out in high definition for the entire room to see. An interesting management style you've developed, I observed, watching them squirm in their seats, creating a culture of bullying, discrimination, and harassment. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I wouldn't care how you treated people you thought were beneath you? James tried to find his voice again, his tone shifting to the pleading one he used when he was in trouble. Alex, honey, we can explain. It was just locker room talk. We didn't mean anything by it. Oh, I think you've explained enough. I cut him off. In fact, you've been explaining who you are for years. Every dinner party, every social gathering, every company event. You made your character crystal clear. I stood up, smoothing my skirt and looking each man in the eye. The board is waiting next door to formalize what you've already accomplished yourselves. Your immediate termination for cause. All of you. James looked like he had been slapped. You can't do this, he protested weakly. I'm your husband. Actually, I smiled, removing my wedding ring and placing it on the table with a metallic click. As of this morning, I am just your CEO, and you're fired. I turned to leave, and the security officer stepped forward to begin the escort. Behind me, I could hear the beginnings of protests, threats, and desperate bargaining, but I didn't look back. I headed toward the boardroom where the real work of cleaning house would begin. I had a company to run, and the rot needed to be carved out completely. The board meeting was swift and decisive. I signed the official termination documents under the gaze of 12 pairs of eyes that held a mixture of admiration and shock. As security led James and his friends from the building, I retreated to my private office on the top floor. Sarah followed me, already swiping through her tablet. Their access has been revoked, she reported. We are freezing their company accounts and backing up all data. Legal has already sent cease and desist orders to prevent any retaliation attempts. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching James and his friends being escorted to their cars far below. Even from this height, I could see the shock in their body language. What about the house? I asked. The security team is already there changing the locks, Sarah said. Your personal items have been moved to the penthouse as planned. As for James's things, they will be delivered to his mother's house by this evening. I nodded, remembering how James had bragged to his mother about supporting me. The irony wouldn't be lost on her. A notification popped up on my private screen. James was already trying to damage control, posting on professional networks about strategic differences with management. I watched as Sarah's team countered with a carefully worded press release about the company's zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment. His LinkedIn profile still lists him as VP of Operations, I noted. Not anymore, Sarah said, her fingers flying across the tablet. We were systematically dismantling his professional identity before he could even reach his car. James and his friends weren't stupid, and I knew wounded pride would soon turn to anger. Their non-competes are already activated, I said. They won't be working in this industry for at least 3 years. We've also notified all major competitors about the circumstances of their termination. No reputable company will touch them. I pulled up the security footage from their exit interviews. James was still in denial, threatening to expose me, while Michael was breaking down in tears as he realized his stock options were now worthless. Peterson has already assembled transition teams, Sarah said. No critical operations will be affected. I suggested we audit everything they touched in the last 3 years, not just one. I remembered snippets of drunken conversations about creative accounting. We needed to flag every client they had personal contact with. My phone buzzed again. James was calling from his personal number. I declined it and added him to the growing list of blocked numbers. The story was already spreading through every department of the building. Schedule an all-hands meeting for tomorrow morning, I decided. It's time they met their real CEO, not the caricature James created. A subtle alert flashed on my screen, showing that James had arrived at his mother's house. The security feed showed him standing among boxes of his belongings, his mother's face moving from confusion to horror. His company car GPS shows it is still in our parking lot, Sarah added. Security is waiting to retrieve it. The afternoon passed in a blur of strategic planning and reassigning responsibilities. By evening, Sarah brought me one final report. They are all serving their garden leave at home. Security is monitoring their communications. No unusual activities yet, but they are in shock. I leaned back in my chair, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of the day. In less than 12 hours, I had shed a false identity, ended a marriage, and fired 5 executives. Was it worth it? Sarah asked quietly. I thought about the years of subtle humiliation and the way they crushed people's dreams for sport. Ask me again in a week, I replied. There was still a reputation to rebuild. Revenge wasn't just about one dramatic moment. It was about ensuring they never recovered enough to hurt anyone else again. I turned back to my monitors, the city lights reflecting in the glass. I had spent years watching and waiting for the perfect moment to act. Now that it was here, I realized the storm was only just beginning, and I was the one holding the lightning. The next morning, I arrived at the office at dawn. James had tried to contact the Thompson account at 3 a.m., but we had already locked down all client communications. I watched the monitoring dashboard as each of the fired executives made predictable moves. Michael had tried to download client lists before his access was revoked, but Peterson had documented every attempt. Their severance packages were voided due to misconduct. James tried to access his investment accounts at midnight, only to find his stock options were worth 0. Time for the next move, I announced. I sent invitations to one-on-one meetings with every employee who had reported to James. I wanted them off balance. The morning unfolded like a chess game. At 9:45 a.m., I stood before the mirror, wearing a steel gray suit that whispered power. The auditorium is full, Sarah reported. I nodded and told her to start the recording. As I walked onto the stage, the whispers died instantly. I'm Alexandra Chin, I began. Some of you knew me as James Morrison's wife. Today, you'll know me as your leader. The silence in the auditorium was absolute, the kind of silence that usually precedes a massive explosion. In the front row, I could see members of the HR team squirming in their seats, likely remembering the sham interview they had put me through just 24 hours ago. I let the tension hang in the air for a moment, making eye contact with as many people as possible. Yesterday, we terminated 5 executives for cause, I said, my voice steady and amplified by the speakers. You have all heard the rumors. Yes, one was my husband. Yes, it was because of documented misconduct, harassment, and the blatant abuse of power. I paused again, letting the weight of those words sink in. But today isn't about them. It's about us. It's about the company we are going to be moving forward. For the next hour, I outlined my vision for Reynolds Technologies. I systematically dismantled the toxic culture James and his friends had fostered. I announced new reporting structures, enhanced HR protocols, and anonymous feedback channels that couldn't be tampered with by middle management. Each announcement was a calculated move to show that the old regime was dead and buried. Finally, I concluded with a promise. My door is open, not metaphorically, but literally. Starting today, any employee can schedule time with me directly. No gatekeepers, no filters. The applause that followed was tentative at first, then it grew into a roar that echoed off the walls. As I left the stage, Sarah showed me her tablet. The internal messaging system was exploding with positive responses. People were relieved, energized, and ready for a change they never thought would come. Back in my office, the next phase of the cleanup began. One by one, I met with James's former direct reports. Each conversation was a delicate balance of reassurance and assessment. I needed to identify who had been a victim of the toxic environment and who had been a willing participant. James called again during these meetings, this time from a burner phone. He was demanding a private meeting, his tone alternating between threats and begging. Document it all with legal, I told Sarah. Check his mother's social media too. She usually telegraphs his next move. By late afternoon, the corporate chessboard had shifted dramatically. 3 of James's most loyal managers resigned rather than adapt to the new regime. I didn't stop them. 2 others provided valuable information about past misconduct in exchange for amnesty, giving us even more ammunition. Then, Sarah announced that the Thompson account representatives wanted to meet the real CEO. I smiled, remembering how James had mocked my suggestions about their account at his birthday party. Schedule it for tomorrow, I said, and send them the presentation I worked on, the one James rejected last month. A notification popped up on my screen showing that James had been spotted at a bar with Michael and 2 other former executives. Our surveillance team was monitoring their conversation in real time. They are plotting something, Sarah observed. Of course they are, I replied. Let them plot. Every move they make just gives us more evidence for the legal battle ahead. I turned to the window, watching the sunset. Somewhere out there, 5 angry men were discovering just how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered. The next morning found me reviewing the surveillance footage from the bar. Their angry conversations, fueled by expensive scotch, had provided exactly the evidence we needed. James's slurred voice filled my office as he talked about a merger from the previous year. Remember that merger? The one that made us look like geniuses? Well, let me tell you how we really pulled that off. What followed was a detailed confession of insider trading, complete with names, dates, and dollar amounts. Send this to legal and notify the SEC anonymously, I ordered. It's time to create a perfect storm. Sarah reported that James had already started selling his personal stocks, and the others were following suit. Perfect, I said. Activate Protocol Thunder. This was the culmination of months of planning. The first phase was to leak the merger investigation to the financial press, making it look like it came from a concerned former employee. Within hours, the story hit the news networks. Reynolds Technology stock took a small hit, exactly as I had planned. James and his friends, already paranoid, saw it as an opportunity to save themselves. I watched the trading monitors as they frantically sold their shares, trying to get ahead of what they thought was a sinking ship. With each sale, they dug themselves deeper into legal jeopardy. Now, I said, release Phase 2. The company announced a major restructuring and expansion. Our stock price shot up within minutes, but James and his friends had already sold at a loss. It was a clear case of attempted market manipulation based on insider knowledge. They had fallen into a trap they built for themselves. Mr. Thompson from the Antitrust Commission called my office. Alexandra Chin, he said. We've received some very interesting information about last year's merger. Yes, we've been conducting an internal investigation, I replied smoothly. I'd be happy to share our findings, including some illuminating surveillance footage from last night. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying precision. By midday, the SEC had opened a formal investigation into their trading activities, and the Antitrust Commission was reviewing the merger. James tried to leave the country that afternoon, but his passport had been flagged at the airport. "How unfortunate," I said, aloud, a small smile. Michael was having a breakdown in his broker's office, and two others were meeting with criminal defense lawyers. The last one was attempting to delete his email history, unaware that we already had everything backed up on our secure servers. Our anonymous tips had also sparked investigations at 3 other companies where they had previously worked. Their lawyers requested a meeting, offering to settle, but I declined. "Let them sweat," I said. By evening, the storm was in full swing. 3 separate class action lawsuits had been filed by former employees alleging systematic discrimination. James's mother had gone quiet on social media, likely seeing the insider trading allegations. James was still attempting to access his frozen accounts, growing more desperate as each transaction was declined. "Should we release the bar footage to the media?" Sarah asked. "Not yet," I said, walking to the window. "Let's see how they handle tomorrow first." Tomorrow would bring the final phase of Protocol Thunder. While they were distracted by investigations, we had been quietly buying up their dumped shares through shell companies. When the market opened, we would announce a major government contract we had been secretly negotiating for months. Their wives were already calling divorce lawyers, realizing they were about to lose everything due to their husband's fraud. I thought about the prenup James had insisted upon, thinking he was protecting himself from me. How ironic that it would now protect my assets from his legal troubles. "Send them all meeting invitations for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp," I instructed. "They won't come," Sarah predicted. "Oh, they will," I said, "because right now, I'm their only hope of survival." As night fell, I reviewed the script for the final confrontation. James and his friends would sit in my office, broken and desperate, as I presented them with their only options. The choice would be between total destruction and merely complete humiliation. Sarah placed 5 visitor passes on my desk, and I picked up the one with James's photo. "Tomorrow, then," I whispered. The perfect storm wasn't just about destruction. It was about forcing your enemies to acknowledge the lightning before the thunder struck. I was ready to end this game once and for all. The clock on my wall ticked toward 9 a.m. with an agonizing rhythm. One by one, James and his former colleagues shuffled into my office. They were shadows of the arrogant men who had broken my glass and mocked my life just days ago. Their expensive suits were wrinkled, their faces haggard from sleepless nights and the mounting pressure of federal investigations. "Gentlemen," I greeted them, staying seated behind my desk, "I believe you've all had an interesting week." James couldn't even meet my eyes. Michael was visibly trembling, his hands buried in his pockets to hide the shaking. The others stared at their visitor badges as if they couldn't believe how far they had fallen. "The board is waiting," I announced, standing up. "Shall we?" They followed me like condemned men toward the executive boardroom. Through the glass walls, they could see the full board of directors, our legal team, and several SEC representatives already seated around the massive table. "Before we begin," I said, pausing at the door and turning to face them, "I want you to understand something. What happens in the next hour will determine not just your professional futures, but your personal freedom." The boardroom fell into a suffocating silence as we entered. Sarah stood at the presentation screen, ready to begin. "Members of the board, distinguished guests," I began, taking my place at the head of the table. "We are here to address several serious matters concerning corporate governance, financial misconduct, and systematic abuse of power. With a nod to Sarah, the presentation began. On the screen, evidence of their misdeeds played out in devastating detail. Trading records, surveillance footage from the bar, email chains, and recorded conversations formed a complete catalog of their destruction. As you can see, I continued, as James sank lower in his chair, the pattern of misconduct extends far beyond simple workplace harassment. We are looking at securities fraud, insider trading, and criminal conspiracy. The SEC representatives were taking rapid notes, their pens scratching against paper in the quiet room. The board members' faces had turned to stone. Michael looked ready to faint. However, I paused, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. Reynolds Technologies is prepared to offer a limited amnesty agreement. One time, one offer, no negotiations. That got their attention. 5 heads snapped up, hope warring with suspicion in their eyes. Sarah distributed thick document folders to each of them. The terms are simple, I explained. Full cooperation with all investigations. Complete disclosure of all misconduct, whether previously discovered or not. Return of all profits from irregular trading activities. And most importantly, a public acknowledgement of your actions. You want us to confess? James found his voice, though it cracked on the last word. I want you to face the consequences of your choices, I corrected him. Sign these agreements now, and Reynolds Technologies will not press criminal charges for the internal theft. Refuse, and the SEC has enough evidence to ensure you all spend considerable time in federal prison. The board members watched impassively as the 5 men frantically flipped through the documents. Their lawyers, seated behind them, were already nodding grimly. You have 5 minutes to decide, I announced, checking my watch. After that, this offer expires, and we proceed with full prosecution. The next few minutes were filled with desperate whispers. I watched the exact moment each one broke. Their signatures appeared on the documents one by one. James was the last, his hand trembling so violently that he could barely scrawl his name. Our eyes met as he pushed the folder across the table. In his, I saw the final death of his arrogance. He finally understood how thoroughly he had been outplayed. Excellent, I said, collecting the signed folders. Sarah will now escort you to individual conference rooms where you will begin your depositions with the SEC. As they were led away, I turned back to the board. Now let's discuss the future of Reynolds Technologies. The next hour was spent outlining our path forward. New corporate governance structures, enhanced compliance protocols, and a complete restructuring of the executive team. The board approved every proposal unanimously. They had seen the precision with which I handled the crisis and knew I was the only one who could lead the company through the aftermath. One last thing, I added. I wanted on the record that every employee affected by the previous management's discrimination will be reviewed for reinstatement or compensation. The board's approval was immediate. It was a small price to pay to avoid the publicity nightmare we had saved them from. Later in my office, Sarah brought me the preliminary depositions. They are singing like canaries, she reported. Each one is trying to save himself by incriminating the others. I scanned the documents, noting how quickly they had turned on each other. Make sure their confessions are properly recorded and witnessed, I said. We don't want any retractions later. Through my window, I saw James being escorted to his car, his career and reputation in tatters. His lawyer was already on the phone, likely trying to salvage what he could from the wreckage. Their trading records are being combed through by forensic accountants, Sarah added. Initial estimates suggest they will each have to repay several million. I nodded, turning back to my desk. The company stock was already up 15% on news of the governance changes. Schedule a company-wide meeting for tomorrow, I instructed. It's time to rebuild what they tried to destroy. Sarah paused at the door. Was it worth it? I thought about the years of watching them crush dreams and bully subordinates. Ask the people who get their jobs back, I replied. Ask the women who won't have to face harassment. The best revenge isn't just about punishment. It's about the change you leave behind. The days following the board meeting unfolded like a carefully orchestrated domino effect. Each morning brought new revelations, each afternoon new consequences. James's criminal defense lawyer quit after James tried to recant parts of his confession. We just sent them the video of his voluntary confession where his rights were read 3 times. The fallout was spreading beyond our walls. 3 other companies launched investigations after discovering similar patterns from their previous employments. Their professional networks were crumbling. Michael attempted suicide, though he was now stable under psychiatric observation. I made sure his medical bills were covered anonymously, while HR fast-tracked the reviews of everyone he had harassed. The media was having a field day. Business journals were running exposés on toxic culture, and tech blogs were analyzing how I had orchestrated the takedown. James's mother gave an interview, tearfully apologizing for enabling his behavior. She ended by announcing a donation to harassment prevention programs. James's wife and the wives of 3 others filed for divorce that morning. They were all claiming they had no knowledge of the financial fraud. I watched the city below, knowing James was probably sitting in his mother's guest room watching his world implode. His assets were frozen, his reputation destroyed, and his future was a maze of legal proceedings. The reinstatement interviews were going well. 12 former employees had already accepted offers, including Jennifer Chin, a brilliant programmer James had driven out 2 years ago. She was now heading our new AI division, her expertise finally valued. The Thompson account doubled their contract with us, impressed by our new transparency. Every day brought new stories of careers derailed and lives impacted by their abuse of power. The lawsuit wasn't just about money anymore. It was about accountability. I reviewed the latest surveillance photos. James looked unshaven and disheveled, trying to meet with former colleagues who suddenly had urgent appointments elsewhere. Peterson sent his final report, showing that productivity was up 40% since the restructuring. The office atmosphere had transformed. Innovation was rising, and the fear that had permeated the departments was dissipating. Their legal teams requested another meeting to discuss lighter penalties in exchange for more cooperation. Too late, I said. Actions have consequences. James tried to contact me through a new email account, but it was automatically archived for the legal team. He was learning the true value of things and the cost of arrogance. As night fell, I reviewed the latest stories from the 300 former employees who had joined the class action lawsuit. Each story was a reminder of why I had to do this. The press was still hounding us, wanting to know how I maintained the persona while being married to him. That story would stay private. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch most carefully. The 6-month mark since my revelation arrived with a quiet intensity. Standing at my office window, I watched the autumn leaves scatter across the corporate plaza, a stark contrast to the cold crystal glass I had held in my hand that first night. The landscape had changed completely. The final numbers are in, Sarah said, stepping into the room. Quarterly profits are up 60%. Employee satisfaction is at record highs. And the class action settlement was approved this morning. I nodded, feeling a sense of closure. The settlement would ensure everyone harmed by James and his cohorts received proper compensation. More importantly, it had forced a public acknowledgement of their actions. And our former executives? I asked. James is working as a junior sales associate at a small electronics store in Ohio, Sarah reported. His mother's influence got him the job, but he's already on probation for attitude issues. The man who once mocked others' careers was now struggling to meet basic sales quotas. Michael is still in therapy, but doing better. He published an online apology and is working with harassment prevention groups. It seems genuine. I picked up a framed magazine cover from my desk. Last month's Business Week featured our transformation, praising our new culture without even needing to mention the scandal. The others were scattered, one teaching ethics at a community college, another working construction, and one moved to Alaska. Their falls had been spectacular, but I didn't dwell on them. I focused on the changes their departure had enabled. Jennifer's AI division had filed 3 new patents this quarter. The team she rebuilt was revolutionizing our approach to software development. Throughout the company, similar transformations had occurred. Departments once ruled by fear now buzzed with innovation. The toxic culture was gone, replaced by something genuinely collaborative. The Thompson account had even sent a bottle of champagne to celebrate our latest joint project. I thought about all the times James had dismissed Jennifer's ideas and made her doubt her own brilliance. Now she was leading our most profitable division. Any recent contact attempts? I asked. James tried to reach out through LinkedIn last week, Sarah said. His profile still lists him as our former VP, though the search results tell a different story. The internet never forgets. Every article about workplace harassment and corporate fraud featured their names as cautionary tales. The documentary crew was requesting another interview about breaking the glass ceiling. Direct them to our division heads instead, I said. Jennifer, Maria, Sophia, the ones doing the real work. My phone buzzed with a message from James's mother. Since her public apology, she had become an unlikely ally in corporate culture reform. I had anonymously funded her speaking tour, turning her regret into something productive. The board meeting is in 10 minutes, Sarah reminded me. I gathered my materials and paused at the office door. The nameplate now read simply, Alexandra Chin, CEO. No more shadows, no more masks. It has been exactly 6 months, Sarah noted, falling into step beside me. Any regrets? I thought about James's last words to me in the boardroom, his final attempt at manipulation when he claimed he really did love me. No, I replied. No regrets. Just lessons learned. Those lessons were about power, responsibility, and the obligation to use both wisely. We were creating something better from the ashes. The employee mentorship program had a waiting list because people were finally eager to learn when they weren't afraid of being mocked. That was the real victory. It wasn't the fall of James and his friends, but the rise of everyone they had tried to keep down. Every promoted employee and every implemented idea was a testament to what could grow when the poison was removed from the soil. One last thing, Sarah said as we reached the boardroom. HR reported 0 harassment complaints this quarter, the first time in history. I paused, letting that sink in. The human cost of the old leadership had been immeasurable, but the healing was real and quantifiable. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was collaborative and focused on long-term growth. The fear of speaking up had been replaced by the excitement of possibility. Shall we begin? I took my seat at the head of the table. I felt the weight of responsibility, but also the lightness of vindication. The best revenge isn't just about destroying what was wrong. It's about building something better in its place. As I looked around at what Reynolds Technologies had become, I knew the victory was complete. Let's talk about the future, I said, opening my folder, because that was what remained after the storm. Not the satisfaction of destruction, but the responsibility of creation. The meeting moved forward with a focus on international expansion, but my mind drifted back for a split second to that marble living room. I remembered the cool glass and the hot anger. I realized then that I had been playing a game they didn't even know existed. I was the queen on the board, while they were just pieces being moved. The transformation of the company was my greatest achievement, a living shield against the kind of men who thought they could rule through cruelty. As the sun climbed higher outside the boardroom windows, I saw the reflection of my team in the glass. They were strong, diverse, and capable. James was a distant memory, a footnote in the history of a company that had outgrown him the moment I decided to stop pretending. I turned my attention back to the strategy at hand, ready for whatever challenges the future might bring. The storm had passed, and the air was finally clear. I was Alexandra Chin, and my company was finally mine again. The transition from strategic planning to total enforcement began with a series of quiet clicks in the early morning light. I stood in my kitchen, the same marble counters James used to lean against while calling me a burden, but now the air was different. A notification pulsed on my phone. James had attempted to use his old corporate credit card to pay for a legal consultation. The transaction was declined instantly, a digital door slamming in his face. I sipped my coffee, watching the city wake up, knowing Sarah and the legal team were already 3 steps ahead of his desperation. We weren't just monitoring his finances, we were watching his every move through the network he once thought he controlled. Sarah's voice came through my headset, sharp and efficient. James just contacted the lead at the Atlas Tech account, she reported. He's offering them a backdoor into our proprietary server in exchange for a signing bonus. The audacity of the move didn't surprise me, but the timing did. He was acting like a cornered animal, forgetting that I had designed the very servers he was trying to sell. Let him send the file, I instructed. I want the timestamp and the IP address from his mother's guest room. This wasn't just workplace misconduct anymore. This was a criminal attempt to compromise company security. By 10 a.m., I was in the office, the energy in the building vibrating with a new, productive intensity. I walked past the desk where James used to hold court, now occupied by a young analyst who didn't fear the person sitting in the corner. Sarah met me at my door with a folder that felt heavier than the rest. "We found the offshore accounts," she said, her voice a low hum of victory. It wasn't just creative accounting. He's been skimming from the charity fund for the last 2 years. I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the rows of numbers that represented every lie James had told since our wedding. He had been building a nest egg using the money I thought we were giving to children in need. The betrayal felt like a cold stone in my chest, but I didn't let it slow me down. "Send the full dossier to the prosecutor's office," I said. "No more deals. No more amnesty." I sat at my desk and pulled up the lobby security feed. James was there, arguing with the security guards, his face a blotchy red as he waved his expired ID. He looked smaller than I remembered, his power stripped away like cheap paint. He thought he could just barge in and demand a meeting with his wife, but the woman he married didn't exist anymore. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Morrison is in the lobby," the guard said, his voice hesitant. "He says he won't leave until he speaks with you. Tell him I'm in a meeting regarding the criminal charges being filed against him," I replied. "Then have him removed for trespassing." I watched on the monitor as James was led out, his shoulders slumping as the glass doors locked behind him. The rest of the day was a blur of forensic audits and client calls. I personally spoke with the heads of our top 5 accounts, reassuring them that the corruption had been excised and the company was stronger than ever. The Thompson account was especially grateful, acknowledging that James had nearly ruined their partnership with his arrogance. By the time the sun began to set, my office was quiet. Sarah came in with a final update. The prosecutor had issued a warrant for James's arrest based on the skimming evidence. He would be picked up within the hour. I felt a brief flicker of something like pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of his laughter in our living room. I walked to the window, looking out at the city that now felt like it belonged to me. I had spent years as a passenger in my own life, playing a part to protect a secret I didn't need to keep. Now the masks were gone, and the pieces were all in place. I reached for my phone and sent a message to the board. Phase 2? Complete? The elevator chimed, and I knew Sarah was waiting to head to dinner. I grabbed my coat, ready to leave the shadows behind for good. But as I reached the door, the office phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then picked it up. Alexandra, please. James's voice whispered, sounding broken and far away. I didn't say a word, just listened to his shallow breathing on the other end of the line. I hung up the phone without answering, the silence of the office feeling heavier than the voice I had just cut off. James was desperate, but his desperation was no longer my responsibility to manage. I walked out to meet Sarah, my heels clicking against the floor with a rhythmic finality. We didn't talk about him over dinner. We talked about the new research facility in Singapore and the talent we were recruiting from the top universities. The next morning, the news of James's arrest hit the local business wires. The headline was stark. Former VP of Reynolds Technologies arrested for embezzlement. I watched the clip of him being led from his mother's house in handcuffs, his head bowed to hide his face from the cameras. It was the public humiliation he had always feared, yet it was the one he had meticulously earned. At the office, the legal team was busy finalizing the paperwork for the civil suit. We weren't just looking for the money back. We were looking to set a precedent that would protect the company forever. Sarah walked in, her face uncharacteristically pale. James's mother is at the reception desk, she whispered. She's asking to see you, and she's not leaving. I hesitated, but then I nodded. Let her up. A few minutes later, the woman who had once looked down her nose at my modest car stood in my office. She looked older, the stress of her son's downfall etched into every line of her face. Alexandra, please, she began, her voice trembling. He's my only son. He made a mistake, but this is too much. He didn't make a mistake, I said, my voice cold and clear. He made a series of choices over 8 years to lie, steal, and belittle the person who was taking care of him. I pointed to the monitors displaying the global health of my company. He thought I was nothing while I was building this. He laughed at my face while I paid for the roof over his head. She started to cry, a soft, broken sound that didn't move me. I can give you the money back, she sobbed. I'll sell the house. Just drop the charges. It's not about the money, I replied, standing up. It's about the truth. James needs to understand that he is not above the consequences of his actions. I called security to escort her out, but I did it gently. The afternoon was spent in a series of high-level briefings. Our stock had rebounded completely, driven by investor confidence in our new transparency. We were launching the new AI initiative a month early, and Jennifer was in my office every hour with a new breakthrough. The company was thriving in the absence of the toxicity that had held it back. Just before I was about to leave, I received a notification from the legal team. James had offered to testify against Michael and the others in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was turning on his own friends to save himself, the final act of a coward. I told the lawyers to let the prosecutor handle it. My work was done. I walked through the lobby on my way out, pausing for a moment to look at the fountain in the center of the plaza. It was a peaceful evening, the air crisp and clean. I realized I didn't feel the need to watch the surveillance feeds anymore. The battle was over, and the victory was far more than just a legal win. I got into my car, the new one I'd bought for myself, not the modest one I'd used for the facade, and started the engine. As I drove away, I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car heading toward the city center. I didn't look back. I had a life to start, a company to lead, and for the first time in 8 years, I was completely free. The city lights blurred as I reached the highway, the road ahead open and clear. The court date arrived on a gray, drizzly morning that matched the mood in the hallway. I arrived with Sarah and my lead counsel, walking past the gaggle of reporters without saying a word. Inside the courtroom, James sat at the defense table, his suit looking 2 sizes too big for his frame. He didn't look at me as the judge entered, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of finality. The evidence we had compiled was overwhelming. One by one, our forensic accountants and investigators took the stand, detailing every diverted dollar and every leaked document. The tapes from the bar were played, James's own voice filling the room as he boasted about his unemployable wife and his insider trading schemes. The jury's faces remained stoic, but I could see the disgust in their eyes. When it was my turn to testify, I kept my voice level and my eyes on the judge. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't need to. I simply stated the facts of how I had built Reynolds Technologies and how I had watched my own husband systematically try to dismantle my legacy from the inside. When I stepped down, the room was so quiet you could hear the rain tapping against the high windows. James declined to take the stand, his lawyer instead focusing on a plea for leniency based on his unblemished record prior to the company. It was a weak argument that ignored the 3 years of documented corruption. After 4 hours of deliberation, the verdict was read: guilty on all counts of embezzlement and securities fraud. The judge was unsparing in his sentencing. You used your position of trust to satisfy your own greed and to belittle those around you, he said, looking directly at James. James was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, with a massive restitution order that would strip him of every remaining asset. As he was led away, he finally looked at me, a desperate, hollow stare that I met with a single, slow nod. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped, and the sun was beginning to break through the clouds. Sarah squeezed my hand. "It's over," she said. I looked at the reporters and finally stopped for a moment. "I have no comment on the sentence," I told them. "My only focus is on the employees and the future of Reynolds Technologies." The ride back to the office was quiet, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. I spent the afternoon signing the final papers for the Employee Restitution Fund. We were giving back double what had been lost through the previous management's policies. It was the most satisfying check I had ever signed. That evening, I held a small gathering in the penthouse, the one James thought we were moving into as a couple. It was just the core team: Sarah, Peterson, Jennifer, and a few others who had stood by me during the transition. We toasted to the future, not the past. I watched Jennifer laughing with one of the new engineers, and I knew the company was in good hands. I stood on the balcony, looking out over the city that had once felt like a prison. The air was cold, but I didn't feel it. I was no longer the woman hiding behind a mask. I was the architect of my own life. I had built a legacy that would outlast any lie and a culture that would protect its own. I went back inside, joining the laughter and the conversation. I was ready for whatever came next. 1 year had passed, since the day the glass doors had locked behind James for the last time. I stood in the lobby of the new Research and Development Wing, a space filled with sunlight and the hum of genuine collaboration. The expansion had been more successful than even my most optimistic projections. We were no longer just a technology company. We were a standard for corporate ethics and innovation. I received a brief report from Sarah that morning, James's mother had sold her house to pay off a portion of the restitution, moving into a small apartment on the other side of town. James himself was serving his time in a minimum security facility, his days spent in the library far away from the power lunches and high-stakes meetings he once lived for. I read the words and then shredded the paper. It was a closed chapter. The morning's all-hands meeting was held in the new auditorium, and the energy in the room was electric. I stood on the stage, looking out at the hundreds of faces, men and women who were here because of their talent and their character. We had achieved a record growth, but that wasn't the metric I was most proud of. I was proud of the zero harassment record and the fact that our highest turnover was now due to employees being recruited for leadership roles elsewhere. "Thank you for being the heart of this company," I told them, my voice filled with a sincere warmth. "You have proven that success doesn't have to come at the cost of dignity." The applause that followed wasn't just for me. It was for the culture we had built together. I left the stage feeling a deep sense of peace that had been missing for most of my adult life. Jennifer met me by the elevator, a wide smile on her face. "The AI project just passed the final stress test," she said. "We're ready for the global rollout." I congratulated her, knowing that her success was the best rebuttal to every joke James had ever made at her expense. She was a leader now, and she was thriving. I spent the afternoon in my office, which was now filled with plants and light, instead of the cold monitors of my old workspace. Sarah came in with a bottle of sparkling water and sat across from me. "You look different today," she observed. "I feel different," I admitted. I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. The legal fallout from the others was finally settling as well. Michael had taken a plea deal and was working with a nonprofit, while the others were facing various levels of civil and criminal penalties. They were gone from the industry, their reputations a warning to anyone who thought they could abuse their power. The poison had been removed, and the soil was healthy again. As the sun began to set, I prepared to head home, to my actual home, a place of comfort and quiet. I walked past the reception desk, and the guard gave me a friendly nod. "Have a good evening, Ms. Chin," he said. "You too, Marcus," I replied, remembering his name. I walked out into the plaza, the cool evening air refreshing on my skin. I looked back at the building, the Reynolds Technologies logo glowing softly against the darkening sky. I had started this journey to protect my legacy, but I had ended it by finding myself. The revenge had been a necessary fire, but the growth that followed was the real victory. I got into my car and drove toward the horizon, the city lights reflecting in my rearview mirror like tiny diamonds. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was moving toward a future that was entirely my own making. The road was long, but for the first time, I knew exactly where it was taking me. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here,